We've been building our dream home for a few years now.
We're on Unit B, B for breve. Unit C, C for coffee.
Cappuccino.
Cappuccino.
Hey,
A for amaretto.
It's a 3-story timber frame home with an ICF walkout basement. We call it the debt-free dream home. We arrived here a few years ago to our rural property with nothing but our car, pickup, and a tiny RV.
Yeah, it's a lot of work, and we're workaholics, so that works out pretty good. It's kind of like a drug, a legal drug that people don't frown upon.
We've been able to do nearly all of the property development work ourselves with help from friends, volunteers, and an occasional subcontractor. It's a big project for 2 people, but we are not in a hurry.
It's gonna come down quick.
Whoa, Nelly.
Alright, that was pretty quick.
Along the way, we've learned a ton and done some things we never imagined we could do with just 2 people with no construction background. We've also done a lot of other stuff like plant a garden, learn to forage, and preserve all of our own fruit, meat, and veggies. Built a deck and a pretty cool hot tub, and we even have our very own fire hydrant. It's been a wild ride. While we'd love to tell you we haven't made a mistake yet, oh, we've made plenty.
Come on. Oh, come on. Don't do that to us. After all this work, the least you could do is put out a little bit of water.
We figured it would be fun to look back at some of them, laugh at the ones that are pretty silly, cringe at the ones that are super scary, and grit our teeth at the ones we should have known better.
Should we set up a diving board? What do you think?
Glad the camera wasn't down there and that happened.
How much time do we put in this water line? There's got to be 20 hours into this water line. Anyway, we get to replace it.
Mistake number 1, our first building design wasn't bad, it was just a bad idea. When we arrived to our property, we had this small shop kind of living quarters plan, and we were trying to get it up right away to protect us until we could build our forever home. All we needed was to be dried in by winter. We arrived to the property late in the year, and we knew winter was coming even though the days at that point were still pretty warm. Well, actually, they were super hot. Like really hot, like so hot, we actually double checked that we were in the right location. We had no clue these types of temperatures were possible this far north. As we were planning to live off grid, we needed to be sure the structure could accommodate that. And by the looks of things, it was a hard no. This shop with living quarters was a traditional freestanding building, and based on our findings would require a pretty substantial amount of energy to keep it cool. Heat, of course, when you're off-grid is pretty easy. Just keep adding wood to the fire. But cooling, on the other hand, is not. We had no idea our property was so hot. So as soon as we arrived, we started digging footings for this shop building. Over the first couple of weeks, we just couldn't believe the heat on this property. It was abnormally high with a full south exposure and pretty much no shade. After sort of pausing that building project while doing other errands, we finally decided to just backfill the footings and rethink this whole thing. We would end up waiting over 2 years to begin building what would be a far superior home. What is fascinating all these years later was how right our intuition was.
It's 1 p.m. It's really hot. What's new? And since we're coming off of multiple 16-hour days and 100+ degree heat in a row, I think, even though it's a hard decision for us, I think we're going to not work through the heat of the day on the house.
Over the next few years, we'd set records in our area, not only for high temperatures, but for the longest heat wave, longest stretch with no measurable precipitation, to name a few. This was a mistake we were actually glad to make, and we ate the humble pie because of the outcome was way better than we could have hoped for. Mistake number 2, we thought design was holding us back from building our dream home. We didn't understand timber framing, really, even though we had done a test project before, but we really wanted to build a timber frame home. Thinking that a good design drawn by a company who builds these types of homes would help us, we hired a company to help us design the house. In their defense, we brought a floor plan and then we worked with them to sort of build a home around it. Visually, it looked pretty cool, and technically it could have worked, But in reality, it was just a bad design, and truthfully, it was not buildable by us, which is probably the most important detail. This expense and effort turned out to be a big waste of time and money. Sort of. This is a mistake we're actually glad we made, and we again ate the humble pie because it turned us onto a path that would be exactly what we needed, which was to attend a timber frame workshop where we'd not only get to try our hand at timber framing and learn the skills on a real building, but we'd also learn the engineering and design behind them. And from that experience, we'd actually form a relationship that would result in a simple, beautiful, and buildable timber frame that turned out amazing.
Guess what?
Did you say that our preliminary drawings might be available?
We decided, well, these are just preliminary, so I guess see
preliminary.
if we need to do any changes, but we've been waiting on our plans to start setting dates.
Yes. but we
Even
can-
though it's mid to end June, it's not too late.
Nope.
There's still a good chance we'll get this done before winter,
Yeah.
which
but-
kind of like scares me.
And look at the frame though. It's not really intimidating.
No?
It looks very approachable. So
Yep.
hopefully we've not bitten off more than we can chew.
Hopefully.
Mistake number 3, we used a fiberglass tape measure to lay out our building footings.
Are you kidding me? What? I am abso-freaking-lutely speechless. What kind of tape measure has 10 inches per foot?
Okay, so this one happened super early in the construction, and because of that, it really puts a dent in your confidence. You'd like to think this experience was just so bizarre, it's super rare, but we're guessing that more than one building has been laid out wrong because of a faulty tape measure. This is one of those totally unexpected things in home building that, when done wrong, wow, can drive you nuts the entire rest of the build. As we were laying out the footing forms for the house and setting up batter boards and string lines, we suddenly realized that the tape measure we were using seemed to be in tenths of a foot.
Yeah, we squared that with this.
So that's why it's all messed up. So we have to throw that one away and do it all again with this one.
What in the... Who makes a tape measure with 10 inches per foot?
All you metric people can have a good laugh at this one. Of course, a foot has 12 inches. So how on earth is it possible? And is it still possible to have a square if you're using tenths of a foot instead of twelfths? Well, at the moment, in the blistering heat after many weeks of hard labor in the moon dust, working on endless projects, it was enough to send us into meltdown mode. There literally cannot be a more important measurement than the foundation, and being out of square or anything, it's so bad. Well, some of you watching this already know this is a mega rookie mistake. It's called an engineer's tape, and yeah, it measures in tenths of a foot. Honestly, we don't know why. It doesn't really matter. All that matters is that we caught it. There's actually another sneaky lesson here, and that's using a fiberglass tape for this measurement at all, because when you stretch them tight, they actually have a little bit of give to them. That's another big problem, because you can easily stretch the tape and create a substantial difference, leading once again to some very inconsistent measuring. The solution is a steel tape. In inches. Steel has no give, of course, and accuracy is far more reliable. Mistake number 4, we used landscaping fabric around our footing drains instead of a geotech fabric sock. Not really sure we'd classify this as a mistake, but some would argue that it is. On a footing drainage system, the piping has small weep holes. It's currently 2023, and if you look, there's still a debate going about which direction the holes should go. What everyone can agree on is that the sediment that infiltrates these pipes will reach the height of the holes. To reduce the sediment, most contractors use a filter sock of some kind. They wrap the pipe in extremely fine cloth or fabric to stop the fines and allow, ideally, only water to come in. Unless you want to go around checking people's footing drains, there's a whole lot of ignorance is bliss going on in this area of home building. At the time, we didn't really know where to source the right fabric, and so we used what we could find, and that ended up being basically a landscaping fabric, which in hindsight was probably a little bit thin, and in the end, we tried to just be very gentle when we were backfilling around it with the pea gravel.
This is what 2 sweaty home builders look like after moving by bucket
6 yards?
Somewhere around 6 yards of soil. Actually, 6 yards of pea gravel to the back side of our house.
And yeah, that was just really crazy.
Mistake number 5. We used Tyvek house wrap to line the drainage trench around the foundation. This is sort of in line with mistake number 4. It really came down to not really knowing where to get the right product. We used Tyvek house wrap instead of a geotech type filter fabric. At the time, we just didn't have a source for this material, and since it needed to be a substantial width of over 10 feet, we didn't know where to get the material we needed. Somehow, the people that we asked didn't know either. In hindsight, we were asking the wrong question, and that happens a lot since we don't have a construction background. Turns out there's a source nearby, which in hindsight's super annoying, but it's certainly not worth excavating the entire foundation to make the change. While this might seem stupid based on common practices, I don't really see that it has any appreciable effect on the foundation drainage. It certainly does not allow the free flow of water into the foundation area. It essentially blocks it. It also doesn't really have an appreciable filtering effect of the fine sediment that often causes foundation drains to fail or can cause undesirable leaks. Perhaps well-draining soil, the massive area of the drain rock added, or all of the other waterproofing details that we did have saved us from essentially a nightmare situation. At this stage, we'd argue while unconventional, it's likely just fine. If we had to do it again, we'd certainly do it correctly. We do have plans at some point to do a camera inspection of our footing drains just for fun and see how it's looking down there. Snaking these footing drains is actually a common practice, and it'll be really interesting to see what all is going on down there when we get around to it. Did we get it right, or do we have a major problem? So the mistake we avoided, the Ufer ground. Some of you listening right now have probably never even heard of a Ufer ground. We didn't. We had no idea what this thing was. In the past, a home's electrical system was grounded through a copper rod that was driven into the ground deep, called a grounding rod, and then the house was connected to that later on.
There's a scientist whose last name I think was Ufer, who worked for the military, who determined that a piece of rebar connected to the footing of a building was a very satisfactory ground. And so they named it a Ufer ground.
But it wouldn't be until recent times that a Ufer ground would be written into the building code, but it is now. During the foundation pour, a small piece of vertical rebar is attached to the rebar structure that's in the footing because it makes earth contact, and this vertical rebar protrudes into the house, where it's later on connected to the home's electrical system. The problem is, nobody is thinking about electricity during the foundation pour. So it's still very common that this extremely tiny step is overlooked. The result is a horrendous expense, as the electrical code does not provide a backup method. That means the electrical inspector who comes later could deny service until a suitable Ufer ground could be provided, which in some cases requires additional excavation, more formed concrete, and a lot of wasted time and money. Somehow, our friend in the concrete business, though not an electrician, knew about this grounding rod, the Ufer ground, and advised us to install one. Our electrical inspector was truly shocked to find out we had one. We actually installed 2 because in some states this is required and they check for continuity to make sure they're properly functioning. We feel super glad we avoided this mistake. It would have caused us a lot of stress, delays, and expense that we avoided with a simple $2 piece of rebar placed at the right time. We're not fooling anyone. We're rookies, not contractors, and this build is substantial for our first home build. We've always been willing to do research and ask a lot of questions. Often we found ourselves confused by the inconsistencies within the industry. Some of it is regional, and some of it's just preference. Others are hand-me-down ideas. We sort of learned that everyone has their way, and they all think their way is right, leaving us to kind of use our own minds on how to proceed on some things. So that's what we did. And we built an amazing home that we're proud of. If you want to follow along with a debt-free dream home build, then join us on Kerf. The link is below this video.